Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I started working at the hotel about 6 months before this whole mess went down. The place was nice enough on the surface, 4 stars and all that, but like any hotel with a nightclub attached, there was always something going on beneath the polish. My co-worker taught me the ropes pretty quick. He was this laid-back guy who knew everyone and everything. Within my first month, he pointed out which women were working and which ones were just there to have a good time. He explained that the bar manager had some kind of arrangement with them. Don't ask, don't tell. I picked up on reading people fast. You had to in that job. I could spot someone dealing in the bathroom or someone looking to score just by watching how they moved. The county cops would run stings every few months, sending in undercover officers pretending to be buyers or sellers. Those nights were always interesting, watching someone get cuffed right there in the lobby. The whole scene sounds sketchy when I describe it like this, but honestly most of the women working there were put together and professional about it. This wasn't some seedy dive bar situation. So this guy checks in one afternoon. I'll call him the businessman since I can't use his real name. Middle-aged white guy, expensive suit, nice watch, shoes that probably cost more than my rent. Standard business traveler stuff. He's standing at the front desk finishing up his paperwork when he hears the music coming from our Mexican restaurant in the lobby. He asks about food and drinks, so I give him the whole pitch. Restaurant hours, the menu highlights, our tequila bar with over 50 brands, everything. He seemed pretty whatever about all of it until I mentioned our nightclub downstairs. That got his attention real quick. His whole demeanor changed. He wanted to know what kind of place it was. I explained about the salsa music and the dancing and the drinks. Then he asked if there were Latin women there to dance with. I told him plenty of them showed up most nights. I could see exactly where his head was at. Guy was probably in town for some conference and looking to blow off steam in the worst way possible. Around 9 that evening, I saw him walk through the lobby, heading down to the nightclub. He'd clearly been drinking since he checked in. Had that loose swagger people get when they're just drunk enough to feel confident, but not sloppy. Yet. My co-worker stopped by the desk right when the businessman was heading downstairs. He told me to keep an eye on that guy because he'd been pretty direct with one of the regulars earlier, asking if she'd come up to his room. That wasn't unusual by itself. Guys asked that kind of stuff all the time, but my co-worker was usually calm about everything, so if he was worried, something was off about this situation. The businessman headed down to the nightclub to hunt for his Latin woman. About an hour later, I saw him coming back up the stairs with someone. He was visibly drunk now, stumbling a bit, and next to him was a woman I recognized. She worked the hotel pretty regularly. When they got closer to the front desk, the businessman looked over at me with this smug look on his face, like he'd won something. I shook my head at him, trying to signal that this was a bad idea. He ignored me completely and they went up to his room together. I was still on shift when the night auditor came in. He was this older Samoan guy who didn't take garbage from anyone. I hung around for a bit catching him up on the day, specifically mentioning the businessman and his visitor. We were standing there talking, maybe an hour and a half after the businessman went upstairs when I saw him stumbling back through the lobby. His shirt was half untucked, his hair was a mess, and he was furious. He came up to the desk and demanded I call the cops right away. I asked him to slow down and tell me what happened. He explained that the woman he took upstairs had just robbed him while he was in the bathroom. He said she took all his cash and that she was a prostitute. He claimed he'd only given her $100 and she took everything else. I mean, he wasn't wrong about what she did for work, but what exactly did he expect me to do at this point? I told him I was sorry to hear that happened. Then he accused me of being in on it with her. I told him I definitely was not involved. The night auditor started to step in, but I waved him off. I had this under control. I asked the businessman to think about what he was asking me to do. I pointed out that he wanted me to call the police so he could report that a prostitute stole his money after he paid her $100 for services. He started yelling that we were all involved in some scam and demanding I call the cops to file a report. Fine. I picked up the phone and called the police department. The officers who showed up knew me by name at that point. I'd called them enough times for various incidents. I explained the situation, and the cop just stared at me. I told him, yeah, I knew how it sounded. The officer went over to talk to the businessman and started asking basic questions. The businessman explained that the woman asked for $100. They agreed on what that money would pay for, and after everything was done, he went to the bathroom to clean up. That's when he heard his room door open and close. He came out of the bathroom to find she'd taken over $500 from his wallet. The cop got her description and wrote everything down. Then he told the businessman he needed to put his hands behind his back because he was under arrest for solicitation. The businessman freaked out, asking why he was being arrested when he was the victim. He said she robbed him and the cop couldn't do this to him. But the cop was already putting handcuffs on him. Reality started setting in on the businessman's face when he realized what he'd just done. He'd literally confessed to paying for services and given the police all the details they needed. They led him out of the lobby without any more fuss. The night auditor and I just stood there for a minute after they left. He asked if that really just happened. I said that yeah, it did. I finished my cigarette and headed home. Just another night at the hotel. I've been teaching middle school math for about 8 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that my brain works a little differently than most people's. I've got 3 kids on the spectrum, and while I was never officially diagnosed growing up, I'm pretty sure I share some of those same traits. Eye contact has always been tough for me. I'll look at someone's forehead or just past their shoulder, and I know it comes across weird sometimes. I check my pockets constantly too. Car keys, phone, wallet, every 15 minutes like clockwork. It's just something I do, and this whole mess happened during my lunch break last Tuesday. I teach until noon. Then I've got about 45 minutes before I need to be back for afternoon classes. I'd scratched off a lottery ticket the night before and won $5, so I figured I'd drive across town to cash it in. I live on tribal land where they don't sell scratchers at the convenience stores, so I have to cross into the next area over when I want to buy or cash in lottery tickets. There's this little mom and pop shop I sometimes go to. Nothing fancy, but it's got character. Old tile floors, handwritten price signs, that kind of thing. I walked in wanting to grab a soda and some chips. Real nutritious lunch for someone who's supposed to be a role model for kids, right? The second I stepped through the door, the woman behind the counter locked eyes on me. Not a friendly look either, more like she was sizing me up for a police lineup. I felt my hand go to my pocket checking for my keys. Then I remembered the scratcher. I stood there for a second deciding whether to cash it right away or wait until after I grabbed my snacks. While I was thinking, my hand went back to my pocket. Key is still there. Then I felt around for change. I had a decent amount of coins rattling around, probably enough to cover everything with the $5 scratcher included. I started doing mental math when I walked toward the cooler. 17 coins, all dimes and quarters, totaling $3.05. How many of each? I thought maybe I could use this as a problem for my students. Get them thinking about systems of equations in a real-world context. I was deep in that thought when I heard yelling. Something about police. I looked up and there was this woman right in my face. Not the cashier, but I assumed she was the owner or manager or something. She was screaming at me to empty my pockets or she'd call the police. She really emphasized that last syllable in a weird way. It was so strange I almost laughed. I asked her what she was talking about. I told her I hadn't done anything wrong. Before I could say anything else, she grabbed my arm. I'm 6'3" and she barely came up to my shoulder, but she dug her fingernails into my skin like she was trying to draw blood. Which, it turns out, she actually did. She was trying to drag me somewhere, maybe toward the counter or the back room. I couldn't tell. I told her to calm down and yanked my arm away hard. She was seriously hurting me. She screamed again, demanding that I empty my pockets. Then she yelled toward the back of the store for someone to call the police. I realized this situation was getting out of control fast. My arm was throbbing where she'd grabbed me. I could feel something wet starting to soak through my shirt sleeve. I told her fine. If she wanted me to empty my pockets, I would. I started pulling everything out. 32 little pieces of a ripped-up scratcher from earlier that week. I slammed each one down on her counter individually. I told her to look at each item. I kept repeating that none of it was her property. With each piece, I got more aggressive about it. 3 receipts came next. 2 showing my hours at the restaurant where I work part-time on weekends. 1 from a car wash. More scratcher pieces. My wallet. A straw wrapper. With each item I smacked it down on the counter with more force than necessary. I was angry and in pain, and I'll admit I wasn't handling it great. Finally, I pulled out the winning scratcher, the one I'd come into cash. By then, her entire counter was covered in my garbage, papers everywhere. It looked like a tornado had hit it. I asked if she was happy now. I wasn't done though. I unbuttoned my shirt pocket and pulled out my teacher ID, 3 pens, and a whiteboard marker. Yeah, I keep all that in there. I spread my arms out wide like I was inviting her to pat me down if she wanted. She just kept shaking her head. Shaking it at me, then at someone in the back, then at me again. Then I heard the sirens. We both stood there with these weird grins on our faces, hers because she thought she'd caught me red-handed, doing whatever she thought I was doing. Mine because I recognized the squad car pulling up. It was Officer Gold, the resource officer at my school. He comes by a couple times a week, eats lunch with some of the kids, does those talks about staying away from drugs. Good guy. Always has this dopey smile on his face. The woman told me that now the police would really search me. She said it with this smug satisfaction in her voice. Officer Gold walked in and immediately saw me standing there with my pockets turned inside out and papers all over the counter. He called out to me, joking about whether I was holding up another liquor store. He was obviously kidding. We'd made that same joke before about how I always look stressed during standardized testing week. I told him I'd already emptied my pockets and that he was welcome to search me if he wanted. He said that wouldn't be necessary. He could see my pockets were empty. Then he asked the woman if she'd watched me empty them and whether there was a camera. He fired off questions rapid fire, then told the woman he needed to ask her some questions. That's when he noticed my arm. Blood was seeping through my polo shirt. I still don't understand how she broke skin through fabric, but she did. He asked how it happened. I just looked at the woman. He followed my gaze and understood immediately. He had her step outside. Some kid, maybe her son, came running out after her with an armful of energy drinks clattering everywhere. Officer Gold had him sit on the curb next to his mom. A second police car showed up. A female officer came inside to talk to me while Officer Gold dealt with the woman outside. She asked me standard questions. When did I arrive? Had I been there earlier today? Did I know the woman or her son? She also asked if I wanted to press charges. I told her that wasn't necessary. I said long as the woman knew I wasn't a thief, that was enough for me. My arm was still throbbing. I had a headache forming, but I didn't want to make this bigger than it needed to be. I just wanted my soda and chips and to get back to school. The officer tried talking me into pressing charges anyway. She handed me a victim's rights pamphlet in case I changed my mind later. I looked out the window and saw the woman sitting in the back of the squad car. I thought she'd be angry or crying or something, but she just sat there with no expression at all. Eventually, they let her out, gave her some paperwork, and she locked up the store and walked to her car like nothing had happened. I grabbed my stuff off the counter. Well, the stuff I actually needed. Left the garbage for her to clean up, paid the cashier who looked terrified the whole time, and drove back to school. My arm hurt for 3 days after that. I've still got a small scar from where her nails dug in. Every time I check my pockets now, which is still every 15 minutes, I remember that whole ridiculous situation. I never did cash that scratcher. I'd been working at this small grocery and butcher shop for about 6 months as my second job. My daughter wanted to do competitive gymnastics, and my son had his heart set on joining the travel hockey team. Those activities weren't cheap, so I picked up evening shifts at the store a few nights a week. The job was supposed to be simple. I was hired as a cashier. Ring up customers, stock shelves when it was slow, keep the front area tidy. That was it. The store was family-owned, been in the neighborhood for decades. They had a butcher shop in the back that did decent business during the day. At night, we mostly sold groceries, cigarettes, lottery tickets, and liquor. Everything was fine until their cleaning person quit. This guy came in every night after closing to sanitize the butcher area. It was a big job. You had to scrub down the cutting tables, sanitize all the equipment, mop the floors with special cleaner, and make sure everything met health code standards. When he left, I figured they'd hire someone else to do it. I showed up for my shift on one evening at 6 o'clock. The owner was waiting for me at the front counter. He told me he had good news about streamlining operations. I asked him what he meant. He explained that they'd decided the cashiers could handle the butcher shop cleanup between customers. He said the doorbell would ring when someone came in and he'd buzz me from his office. I'd come up front, ring them out, then go back to cleaning. He made it sound simple. I stared at him for a second, trying to process what he'd just said. I asked if he wanted me to clean the butcher shop. He confirmed it and said it wasn't that hard, just sanitizing and mopping. I told him that I wasn't hired to do that. I reminded him I was hired to run the register and stock shelves. He brushed off my concern and said things change. He said they needed someone to do it, and I was there. I told him no. The word came out flat. His face went red almost immediately. He asked me what I'd just said to him. I repeated that I said no. I explained that wasn't what I was hired for and that it was a completely different job requiring different training. I told him I didn't know the health codes for butcher shops or what chemicals to use. I said it wasn't my responsibility. He told me then that I could consider myself fired. He turned and walked toward his office in the back. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. Then I grabbed my jacket and my keys from behind the counter. I said fine and walked out the door. I drove home annoyed but also relieved. I didn't need that job badly enough to let them dump extra work on me that I wasn't trained for or paid to do. My kids would understand if we had to cut back on activities for a bit. When I got home, I changed into comfortable clothes and made dinner. My daughter asked why I was home early, and I told her I'd quit. She was disappointed about gymnastics, but I promised we'd figure something out. Around 7:30, my phone rang. It was the owner, and he was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. He demanded to know where I was and yelled that I was supposed to be working. I reminded him that he'd fired me. He insisted he hadn't fired me and said he'd told me to clean the butcher shop, or I was fired. I pointed out that I'd said fine and left, which meant he'd fired me. He started yelling that I'd abandoned my post and that the store got robbed because I wasn't there. I asked what he meant. He told me someone stole all the liquor, all the cigarettes, and all the scratch-off tickets. He said it was my fault and that he was calling the police. He said I was going to get arrested. I asked him what I'd be arrested for since he'd fired me. He screamed that I was an accomplice and that I knew this would happen. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, half convinced this was some kind of joke. 20 minutes later, a police officer called and asked if I could come down to the store to give a statement. I said sure and drove back. When I got there were 2 police cars in the parking lot. The store was closed, lights blazing. The owner was pacing back and forth near the entrance, yelling into his phone. When he saw me, he pointed and started screaming that I should be arrested. He yelled that I'd left so my friends could rob him. The officer who called me walked over and introduced himself. He seemed calm, almost bored. He asked me to tell him what happened tonight. I explained that I'd come in for my shift at 6. The owner told me I had to start cleaning the butcher shop in addition to running the register. I told him that wasn't what I was hired for. He said I could do it or consider myself fired. I said fine and left. The owner interrupted and yelled that I'd abandoned my post. The officer told him to please be quiet. Then he asked the owner if he'd told me I was fired. The owner said he'd told me I could consider myself fired if I didn't do what he asked. The officer asked what I'd said in response. The owner admitted I'd said fine. The officer looked at me, then at the owner. He asked if there were security cameras. The owner said yes and added that it would show I'd left. The officer asked if we could review the footage. We all went inside to the office. The owner pulled up the video from earlier that evening. You could see me standing at the counter, the owner talking to me shaking my head, the owner walking away, and then me grabbing my stuff and leaving. The video had audio, you could hear everything. The officer watched it twice. He told the owner that he clearly told me I was fired and that I'd left because he terminated my employment. The owner sputtered that I knew he didn't mean it like that. The officer said that's not how employment works. He explained that you can't arrest someone for leaving after you fire them. The owner tried to argue, but the officer cut him off. He asked what happened after I left. The owner explained that he thought I was in the back cleaning. He said he was in his office, and when customers came in, he'd buzz the butcher area. No one came up front. He said he thought I was just busy. Then someone came to his office and said no one was at the register. The officer asked how long he was in his office. The owner said about 2 hours. The officer asked if that meant he didn't check on the store for 2 hours. The owner said he was watching the cameras. The officer replied that he clearly wasn't watching the right ones. The officer turned to me and said I was free to go. He told the owner he couldn't file charges against me because I'd done nothing wrong. When I walked out, I heard him explaining that the owner's insurance might not cover the loss since he'd left the store unattended. The store ended up losing around $30,000 in merchandise that night. The owner tried to blame me to the insurance company, but the police report and security footage made it clear he'd fired me and then failed to supervise his own store. I never went back. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.